Hello, everybody. This is the 100 Connected podcast. And today you are being greeted by Hanneke. I'm standing in for the lovely Annette de Graaf, who can't be with us today. And I'm going to try and mimic how she always greets everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And welcome. Thank you for tuning in and listening. We are so happy to have you and to have a discussion today with yet another amazing education innovator who is doing incredible things in the world. But before we introduce our guest of honor, just a quick introduction to everyone else here on that panel, the sidekicks, the group of eager interviewers, myself, Hanneke, from South Africa. I am from Buzz Kids. We use the arts to help develop children in beautiful ways. And my gorgeous friend and colleague Sherelle from Cheza Cheza in Kenya. Hi, Sherelle.
Hi, everyone that is listening. My name is Sherelle, and I'm calling from very colorful studio, actually. So that's why you see the colors. This is our dance studio because I work at Cheza Cheza, and Cheza Cheza uses dance and movement to support social and emotional development. So we'll have a lot to talk about, Ake.
Yes. And then, of course, from 100 himself, the representative, the esteemed and wonderful Alex Shapiro joining us from Helsinki, Finland. Hi, Alex.
Hello, everybody. Ake, Sherelle, Hanneke, and everyone listening. It's so nice to be with you all again today. These discussions are so invigorating. Let's get to it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. So I have the honor of introducing everyone to Ake today. And we really had the privilege of meeting and engaging with the wonderful Ake at the 100 Summit, which was held in Helsinki, Finland last November. Ake really inspired us from both a personal and professional level. His initiative, Holotracker, which he's the co-founder of, was also recognized as one of the 100 most innovative and scalable education solutions at the prestigious 100 Global Collections Summit that we got to enjoy last year. And as the co-founder of this intervention, Ake is helping to reshape how schools track and support whole person development in the child or the user. So Ake joins us from Singapore today. Welcome, and thanks for being with us, Ake.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for everybody who is listening. You're hearing, I think, a continuation of a brilliant conversation that we had in Helsinki. I was just joking before this that we were running a little global South revolution. And I think that really is what this conversation is about. How do we make these very important social and emotional skills visible for anyone from schools that are privileged and can have that extra resources to the everyday kind of learning context or alternative learning context like Sherelle's in her dance programs in Kenya.
Wow. It's very inspiring and I think so apt for where the world is and what it's asking for. So Holotracker sounds like an incredible tool, and I think scratched the surface and I understand it. We got to use it at the summit, which was amazing. It is an app, as you say, that makes whole person qualities visible in a systematic and meaningful way. So I want to start with the basics, as if we've just landed from Mars. I always like to use that. Help us understand what is the exact problem that Holotracker is aiming to help solve for communities and for schools, and what is the inspiration behind it, and also just the backstory. Take us back in time and share with us a little bit more, if you may.
Yeah, of course. So the story is actually really interesting. I started somewhere 7 years ago, where I met this team of really extraordinary, let's call it learning architects, right? They have a team of people who have run international schools around the world. There was a well-being coach, someone who has been working with social emotional development with her students in her school for the longest time. And combined, this team had something like a century of experience in education. And all of them were kind of gathered to work on a very simple but sophisticated problem, which is, how do we design a true holistic report card? It sounds simple, right? And if you think about it, it's all the buzz today. We want to support the whole student. We want to create that holistic report card. By the way, two kind of main things that we wanted to do. The first is no surveys, right? So many people do these holistic reports with self-report surveys. They are honestly a pain to do, and it requires actually a very high level of literacy in order to make any of those results relevant. And we know that children and many teachers may not actually be equipped with these skills, not because they don't want to, but because that's not the training that they've been through before. So design a holistic report card. The first design question was no surveys. The second was really that, can we design this in a way that is extremely relevant to their day-to-day? And why do I say this? I think a lot of existing systems serve to substantiate evidence of whole person growth, but they may take 3 weeks, 4 weeks, if you're lucky, to return back to the user, right? So think back at the last psychometric test that you did, or think back at the last few assessments or role-playing assessments that you did. It takes a long time to assess the information and to make sense of it. By the time it returns to the student and the teacher, the incident is over, right? I have so many times where I hear schools that they do well-being check-ins and they send that data to the heads of department that crunches all this data. And by the time it goes back to the student, they have already solved the problem. How do we design a system of feedback that returns information back to teachers, back to students in the enjoyable ways? That was kind of the foundations of Holotracker, and what the team had thought about at that point was, let's create an observation-based system. You cannot say that someone is 7 out of 10 for creative, but you can sure say it's an observable moment, something that I can be excited about when my friend or my student is showing that creative problem solving in their math lesson, or they're doodling as they are learning about photosynthesis. These are things that we can see and we can observe. And once we're able to log that over time, over multiple observers, you start to form this amazing dossier of what the student is like. So that's the foundations of Holotracker. The problem we were trying to solve was, again, create a holistic report card, no surveys, make this relevant to the everyday learning experience, and use observations for that support of human and to see human potential.
Wow. Super, super, super inspirational.
Thank you so much, Ake, because you're touching on so many challenges that not only students will face with these surveys, like you said, literacy. We are here in Kenya and we work in the informal settlements, and we use some standardized tools that were used for British kids in British classrooms that is completely not the same environment as our kids are living in today. So that makes, these surveys very, very difficult, touching upon also the teachers. I would love you to take us through how the app works in terms of what is a teacher experiencing or a student. So take us through a day in a school or any type of activity that would use the Holotracker.
Of course, yeah. So think of Holotracker as your learning companion, right? So you go for class, you do project work, teachers teach in front and facilitate, their classes as they would. But Holotracker is kind of a companion that can be accessible with any device, usually a mobile phone, but it might be a laptop or a tablet. And as the lesson goes by, so let's say today we're learning something on probability in a math class. Apart from just learning about the content, there's also, for example, that student at the back of the class that's contextualizing this to their friends. When it comes to probability, could be related to your gaming statistics or your YouTube views. These are ways that learners are showing that collaboration in the classroom. So again, as the class goes by, naturally, the students are picking up information, but they're also noticing that social context or that social emotional context around their learning. So they can log these observations as they go along. It's spontaneous. It doesn't require them to go onto a long survey and go into every single question. You just say, oh, my friend helped me to understand the concept through relating it to YouTube, right? Or a teacher might be observing the class dynamics and go, oh, he helped a friend in that challenge that they couldn't solve, or they were persistent in the problem even though they couldn't do it the first time. They tried it 4 or 5 times and finally they did it, right? So it's really an organic kind of learning companion to make observations. The magic, again, is that this feedback is immediate. The teacher, when they go back into their staff room, they open up a dashboard and they see all the information live, all the observations that have been made by them there and then, all the observations that the students may have made if they allow the students to use the platform. And they can start to make sense of it using some of the artificial intelligence features that we have on the back end. We have a suite of writing assistants that might be able to create an affirmation card, for example, right? They say, this is how we have grown in the last 3 or 4 weeks, to anything from a parent update or a student testimonial. And this really reduces that workload that teachers have on reporting. So the Holotracker experience day to day, really just a companion for you to make observations alongside, make sense of that learning. But it also really helps the teacher at the work desk, right, where they are trying to create these reports or they're trying to make sense of what's happening in the classroom. And they leverage on these insights to give feedback to their students.
And you're capturing that in real time. You've got your phone next to you and you are capturing an anecdote or a moment, and you're able to kind of input that into that student's sort of portal or login or the file attached to this child. I'm very interested in, this as we call what you refer to it as deep skills. I love that word, deep skills, measuring different things to like, can the child necessarily count and read and all the information that we usually gather about a child. But looking at the child, as you say, as this whole being, it's beautiful how you describe it. And that leads me to a question, and there's two sides to this. The one, I want to go into the visual representation of how you so beautifully sort of in infographics and images portray the information back, and we'll get there. But before that, these deep skills, things like character development, things like resilience, leadership, etc., it's a difficult thing to measure. So you've already sort of alluded to just dropping in information and just someone is doodling and just observing this about the child. Now, the reason this is so interesting to me is in Buzz, in our work, we like to also track some deep skills. We have 18 assessment standards around what we like to call the 21st century skills. So these are things like midline crossing, listening, vocab extension, out the box thinking. It becomes a little bit difficult to measure. So in our case, we give the facilitator who's working with it a little bit of a reference. What does it mean and what are you looking for to indicate? What is it that you guys do and how can you help me be better in terms of measuring things like these deep skills? And I mean, how long is a piece of string? We can go all the way to resilience, to leadership, to out-the-box thinking. But help me understand how you measure and track things like this so that I can also get better at it.
Yeah, of course. So I think every good school and every good learning project in the world today has a theory of change, right? And framework, like you said, teen skills that you're trying to develop in your students or your learners. I think the thing about having these 18 skills is that unless we turn them into observable moments, as you have very greatly done for the trainers that you have, it can be very abstract. It can be very difficult for people to make sense of that behavior. Where I am in Singapore, we are obsessed with measurement, and every school would have created a rubric of sorts, right, of different ways to develop these certain skills. I say just let students and teachers go out in the wild. These observable moments are out there in the wild and not in our Excel sheets and not in our documents. So I'll give you an example. With one of our schools in Singapore, they had this new framework for helping their students to communicate better, right? So there's clarity, there's confidence, and there's also that element of audience empathy. And they tried to design a whole framework around it. And after that, they thought, maybe I just release these three words to my students: clarity, context, and confidence. And let them see what kind of ways they want to collect feedback on that, right? So what does it mean to them today? How do they think they're being clear today? And how do they want help in clarity today? And then with that feedback loop, the teachers see that the students are trying to develop these skills and they go, oh, let me give you specific observable feedback. When you were presenting in front of the class, you actually saw that someone at the back was not paying attention and you pointed to them and you were contextualizing a message for them. So I think going back to how we can observe better, it's radically simplifying things that we are tempted to do, such as rubrics of specific developmental behaviors. These are important, don't get me wrong, but allowing them to also just live in the wild and to pick them up in the wild, to say that we can make these observations, we can make sense of these observations later on. This school, in the exercise, they collected 2,000 observations across 2 days of the students doing these projects. And then they sat down and went, I now have very specific ways that I know I can improve. And I think that was just a brilliant process for them. Yeah.
Beautiful. And radically simplifying. I think that might be my quote of the year. Wow. And that is something that we need to take into all education and learning. That's the world we're living in now. Radically simplifying. I feel like there's a question coming from Alex.
So just yesterday, I was talking with a colleague of mine about the difference between self-assessment and grading, how often self-assessment actually just turns out to be asking a child to grade themselves in some way. And one of the really interesting things about Holotracker is that there is no way to grade yourself in it, right? I think the closest thing you have is when you make a reflection on yourself, and then within the app, you have the ability to say, how passionate you are about this comment. And I think that's the closest that you would get to this. But one of the issues that comes up for this kind of self-assessment that turns it into this less holistic thing, less useful thing, is the literacy, which you kind of talked about here. So there's two sides to it. The ability of students to reflect critically on their own work, and then also the ability of of teachers to use this, right, to shift that mindset. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what kind of training or preparation that you recommend that teachers have, or that you recommend that students have before they really engage with this.
Yeah, I think learning character or learning these skills is not unlike how we know how to learn subjects like English and math, right? First, you anticipate that you're going to learn something, fractions. I'm going to read a new book on let's say To Kill a Mockingbird. I guess every school around the world uses that book. And then you also start to go through that experience. So you act on the anticipation, and then you reflect on it, right? After acting on it, how have you achieved what you were anticipating? It's the same with skills, right? So when we work with teachers and students, we say, what are some of the clusters of behaviors we're anticipating to learn? And this might be social emotional skills, collaboration, self-awareness, social awareness, or this might be, in Singapore, there's this emerging first century competencies like inventive thinking or adaptive thinking. So anticipating and putting a frame of reference, and then saying, in every instance of my school day, can I try to observe how I'm performing this skill, right? So whether it is creativity, might be when I mentioned just now, doodling on the notepad while I'm trying to learn about photosynthesis, to being able to put unrelated ideas together and to make these moments visible. So that's the acting, right? So you anticipate, you act, and then you reflect at the end of the school term, or sometimes even in the school week. You look at the observations that are coming to you, and they go, how have I shown creativity? And maybe how have I not shown some of these skills? I wanted to go back to what you were talking about just now, also about visualization. So on Holotracker, we provide visual data for students and teachers to look at these stories. I think if people are gamers and they're familiar with games like FIFA, it would be the FIFA chart, where you have all the observable clusters, and it kind of stretches the more you've observed them. With teachers, I find that I have to use the pizza dough analogy, where, you have a pizza and you're stretching them into different dimensions. And the more you stretch them, the more you see it goes closer to the edges. Anyway, imagine now at the end of the term, you look at your pizza chart or your FIFA chart, and you go, I've seen a lot of creativity and collaboration, but not so much empathy. It doesn't necessarily mean that I haven't shown empathy. It could be I haven't been given the right situations to show empathy. My teacher or I don't understand what empathy and observable behavior means. Or it could be genuinely that I have to work on empathy. So I think when it comes to picking up these skills, again, it's the constant anticipate, act, and reflect process that we're trying to work on with our teachers and learners. And I must emphasize again that teachers are very much in need of these skills as much as our learners are. Sometimes we go, our students have to develop in 21st century competencies, but we forget that our teachers are not trained for facilitating these skills. So many times in our classrooms, we find that the students are actually much better observers of these skills than our teachers, actually.
One of the things I really appreciate about that is it even now is giving me a more expansive view of what kind of adaptive behaviors are in school, right? I'm a doodler. I'm always doodling or knitting. I need to be doing something else with my hands so that then I can pay attention. And so that you now have space within this, and you can train teachers to help them realize, but also to help students realize that it's not necessarily that you're antsy. It's that this is one of the ways that you're processing, right? Or it's not necessarily that my classmate is distracting themselves. Maybe they are trying to pay attention. And so then I can grow my own empathy skills and understand better what it means to be in a community, what it means to interact with other people. I think that's such an important way that we then build those social emotional skills and the 21st century skills.
100%. And something I always like to tell teachers is that, in fact, teachers know. Teachers know that doodling is learning. Teachers know that your friends are not disturbing you. They're trying to teach you something. I think what Holotracker brings to schools is that finally we have a system that knows how to hold these moments. These moments would never help before, right? It doesn't show up in your test scores. It doesn't show up in your report card. But now we are observing these moments and recognizing them for what they are. And we can give, again, people feedback on these moments. So I think it's really just creating a system that holds these moments for teachers and students.
I think it's wonderful that we're getting teachers on board in this. And I know that we also have to get parents on board for us, but also for parents. They're very ingrained in this standardized testing. And this is how we measure progress of our children. Now, the teachers are changing their mindset, but we also need to take parents along on this journey. I would like to give an example of our class and what's happening. So at Cheza, we focus on social and emotional development. And one skill is confidence. But that confidence sometimes is mistaken for arrogance at home. My child is speaking up, and I don't want my child to do this, while we in our activity in our classroom are encouraging this, right? So that sometimes can create a bit of friction from the home environment to the classroom environment. So I'm just wondering, how do you take parents along on this journey so that whatever the child is showing in class is also something that's supported at home to really, again, that whole child development is stimulated everywhere?
Yeah, I think that's a very thoughtful question and one of the most important, right? Because parents really guide how our students are seeing learning and how our teachers and schools are responding to learning. I want to take one step back on this, right? And ask a question of why are parents so obsessed or anxious, I would say, that's probably a better word, with standardized testing. It's because they care about their children, and standardized testing for the longest time has been the most tangible way to address the anxiety. It is a number on a report card that it's relatable, that you can compare and know that your students or your children are in the right place and that they are on their way to success, which is what every parent wants for their child. So when I think about this anxiety and I think about Holotracker, I almost think that we have to provide them with a new way of addressing the anxiety and a way that is so reaffirming, that is so emotionally connected, that you ease the anxiety on standardized testing and refocus the attention on something that is more important. I'll bring up a story in my schools where one of the schools that I'm very proud of, it's the School for Cerebral Palsy here in Singapore. They use Holotracker. They've been one of our first schools. They've been using it for about 3 years now. And when they first exported the Holotracker reports, and mind you, for the longest time, many parents were very anxious about whether their students their children are going to be okay in society, whether they should, go into the academic pathway, can they keep up with their peers, can they even measure up to their peers, right? So when they first received the Holotracker report, they started to see that they had real feedback about specific moments that their child is showing things like confidence, like responsibility, the exact same traits that I think has a real emotional touch to it. For example, it's not just, oh, you are now more responsible. It's broad, it's unspecific. But you were responsible in that moment 3 weeks ago where you felt like you had a lot of medication and didn't want to go through the lesson, but you persevered anyway because you knew that it was responsible to do so. When we are able to bring up these specific moments, I think people start to feel very connected to how their children are growing. I have this, again, in that same school, the first time we use our AI reports, our AI basically summarizes this and returns it to the teacher so they can share it as a report to the parents. When we first did the reports, it was also the first time that we released our AI. And I received a call from the lead teacher. She said, "Hey, I have teachers crying in the staff room." And I was like, why? And to me, I was like, there was something wrong with the reports, right? Because, AI is new, AI is unpredictable. It might have written something bad about the student, much more about a vulnerable population. And then the teacher said, they received calls from the parents telling them, "Thank you for seeing this in my child. I didn't know that they can do this." And the teacher felt so affirmed because they've never been affirmed by a parent before. It's always parent complaints, right? So I think that becomes really that power when we can be specific about our observations, when we can be specific about the feedback that we give to parents, such that it's not just a empty kind of resilience or confidence that we're building in people, but the specific ways that confidence can help guide their learning journey. And by the way, if you're slowly becoming more confident, then you also start to go, hey, I can approach that math problem better. I can approach any problem better. Yeah, so I guess that's what I have to say about how we bring parents into that process.
I want to share a story, Ake, about our 13 years of children coming through this BUZZ program with the arts, drama, dance, and singing, and our 18 learning areas that we try to, or child development areas that we try to track and give feedback on. And so I've shared with you that we tell the facilitator what to look for. And we also, when we report back to the parent in this very neat rubric, we try to define what does it mean when I say out the box thinking, this is what I mean. And then the child gets the scorecard, which, I now know that, I want to go more into the direction where you guys are. But what parents always come back to us about is the anecdotal written bit of feedback. And it's when the facilitator tells a story about the child. And it's when it's something really personal. So sometimes they say the child is generally like this, generally like that. But when they can anecdotally tell a little story about when we did the workshop about sharks, little Johnny came alive and shared about the first time that he went to the aquarium, and the parent is suddenly brought into the space just by these anecdotal stories. But we can go even further when you show that child's character. And I'm really excited to really kind of test drive, and I hope that everyone listening will go and look for Holotracker and test drive this for yourself to see. This is also, I think, an example of how AI and human genius comes together and does something better. Because, we feel a little bit afraid of AI and what it can do from your story. And then when you listen to how guys have done this so sensitively, I just wanted to share that, like, from my experience as well, giving feedback, it's when those little human nuggets of beautiful human experience can be shared. And that brings me to this visual component that I really want to jump into. How you guys display it back. You spoke about the pizza dough and the FIFA scorecard. Tell us more about how that works. How much does the user, if I want to now plug this into my whole business, how much can I say, I like a Venn diagram, or I want it to come out looking like an infographic? How much room is there to play? How does it work on the back end?
Yeah, before I talk about the visual, I wanted to go back on your point on AI because I really relate to that. It's so important that today we use AI in a way that enhances the human condition, not replace it. And I think that is how we have always kind of treated AI on Holotracker. I think parallel to this is the reality that if you told every teacher to use without technology, make observations for their students and give that feedback to the students, they would have a lot of work to do. Your teachers will probably run a revolution against you, and you will probably be working until 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. every night, just anecdoting this, making these anecdotes on a piece of paper or a spreadsheet. But with technology, I think Holotracker allows people to just log these moments and almost forget them for a while, right? That this has happened, and we're just making these moments visible and come back to them later on. And we also have the AI system that allows us to synthesize this information and look for patterns. And speaking of patterns, I guess this is where the visuals come about. I think, sometimes we overcomplicate the kind of visuals we want to provide to students. We want to give them all the different kind of fancy charts. I do find that the pizza dough or even a pie chart of how you're developing in different skills has worked very well for our learners, right? Because it simply shows you the areas of strengths and the areas of potential improvements that you have. Something I would say was that we obsess a lot with our visuals when it came to the pizza dough. I know it's something that you have seen on every game, but there is a design language to it that is so important because when you design, for example, a visual with a negative background, you start to notice the gaps. Right. So in our first iterations of the pizza dough, I keep saying the pizza dough, the radar chart, right? And in our first iterations of it, we realized that users were paying a lot of attention on the lag. So you didn't show confidence. And it was because our initial radar chart was a sharp edge. And recently we turned it into a rounded edge, and we realized that people paid attention to the halves. right? So which areas have you shown a lot more in it? And I think there's that kind of design language around that. But that's me obsessing over a very small feature. I would say also that the fact that all the observations can be made visible. So the chart always accompanies either the observations as it is, or it also contains a summary or an AI summary that the teacher has generated. Right? Again, going back to summaries for the teacher. So it might be, for example, an affirmation card of 3 sentences with a pie chart or a radar chart above it. And that's kind of the student's profile. Now, I always think about reports also as momentum generating, right? So it's no use having a report if you don't know what to do with it. On Holotracker, each report has a life. It allows you to respond to these reports. So teachers can actually create a reflection question. For example, our schools like to use something called 3 stars, 1 wish, right? 3 ways that you think you've shown strength, 1 wish that you want to work on, right? Or it could be a tiny behavior that I want to work on. And it's important that as you deliver this visual, as you deliver this content to the students, they have a chance to add their voice. And if you think about it, that's kind of how social media works, right? You see something, either a trend and you want to replicate it and do it somewhere else, or you see something and you immediately want to share it with someone else. And that's, I think, the life of a report. So when we show that visual to our students or our parents, we allow them to respond to a short video. We allow them to respond through a little reflection that the school has designed for them. And it's kind of, again, a community of practice, right? Going back to the school I was talking about just now, the Cerebral Palsy Alliance school, they started to allow parents to respond every time they shared these insights. And over the holidays, the parents would collaborate with their students, their children on a 30-second video to show like, hey, this is how they're showing resilience at home. And the parents and the teachers get to watch this. And it's a really kind of touching communication between the two. In terms of visuals, there's a lot of good design that goes into how we show this information. Make sure the information is transparent. Make sure if you show a chart, we also show you the story that accompanies it. But what's also important is the momentum and the life after you show those reports. What are you going to do with the information? How are they going to respond and add their own voice?
You're the expert. You're the world expert on this now. I am in awe.
I learn only as much as my teachers show me. So I'm just translating stories here.
I also want to connect the success of the Holotracker with a different piece of education, which is to say that you've been an edupreneur since you were 15 years old. Let's not gloss over that fact. You're incredibly talented and there's a huge future in education for you. What does being an edupreneur mean to you? Because a lot of times we don't talk about education and in a for-profit model. And what does entrepreneurship and education together mean for impact in education? I really wanted to get your take on that.
It's so funny because when I used to tell people I started when I was 15, I had the privilege of being still very young. But now when I say, I started when I was 15, I do feel a little bit old, like I've crossed that stage. It's been almost 15 years now that I've met this. But to answer your question on education entrepreneurship, I think it really starts with a fundamental belief that if something brings value, people will kind of match that value, right? And it's not about necessarily profit making or accumulation of profit. It's really just a matching of value and being unafraid to showcase that value to people. The inspiration for using that for-profit model, specifically for Holotracker, was quite interesting because we had schools that told us, and again, this was a pet project 7 years ago. We had no idea it was going to turn into a business. And we had schools that tell us if we pay for it, it would be on that liner that we have in our financial report that we share with our board of directors, that they share with the ministry. And because it is in that liner, we start to make a difference because we can use it again next year, right? That you are going to be around because we will pay you for it. Our next generation of teachers will know that this exists because even if we leave, that liner will always be there. But I think that's that kind of relationship that we want to have with entrepreneurship, right? That you create value that you want to be around for a long time. And that value is not just because you said there was value, but it was decided between you and the other party. I think that's kind of my relationship with entrepreneurship. I think at the start, I was a little bit more idealistic about this. I was always thinking like, hey, I might be afraid to charge people for services or the products. But I realized that when I had that mentality, I was designing always for a very small group of people, that I was making programs that were amazing, but I might, deliver it in a very rich school that could afford for me to design a program with that level of intentionality. Once I started to think in the scale that it needs to change education, again, Holotracker is designed for that scale. And I realized that, hey, I can charge a very small amount per student, make sure it matches or even is a lower cost than what they're using, and achieve that scale across millions of students rather than 100 or 200 students. And I think that's kind of my thinking around things now, that if we are okay with allowing people to decide the value for you, then things can be a lot more sustainable in the long run.
Thank you. I think a lot of people needed to hear that, including myself. And thank you of talking about value and sustainability. And that is not, a dirty word when we talk about education. So thank you for sharing that. Yes.
Yeah, I do have an insight about that I'll add though, which is that education is one of those spaces that needs a lot of innovation.
Yes.
Things have just seriously not moved for a century, right? For centuries. I had a joke where I visited Meteora in Greece, and there was this place where they had Aesop's fables and the classroom of that time. And I looked at the classroom and it looked exactly like a classroom that I have here in Singapore. And mind you, we are one of the most successful education systems in the world, right? And I was like, there's a lot of help that needs to come into education. So I think there is a nuance when it comes to discussing value in education, because the reason why things have not moved is because there are many parties that don't have that privilege of moving pieces, especially in your context in Kenya, for example, in South Africa. It is quite a big step that we need to make to change educational practices. So I think this is also where we need impact funding, philanthropists to kind of come in to say, hey, entrepreneurs should go and try and do new things, but we absorb a little bit of that risk and we can subsidize some of that. But the eventual goal is that the local kind of government or the local authorities or the local schools have to learn to sustain those projects in the long run. I think this is something that I've been grappling with a lot recently, because we've been kind of thinking about projects. We started one in Ukraine recently, where obviously there's the war that's going on, and we initially subsidized the first phase of development, and we said, use that platform for free. But because the idea is to create long-term success, let's use this time to also tell the story of Ukraine, and tell the story of your school, and tell the story of changing assessments so that we can build success in the long term. So I thought to that insight. It's not always just about value. I think there's also that ecosystem of people coming.
I couldn't agree with you more about this thing around education needing to be well-funded and well-supported by governments around the world. And really, us entrepreneurs should be elevated and allowed, the space to do the thing and not do it in such a hustle space. I mean, I have sat in South Africa for 13 years. You've got the issue of where education is, and then you're also in a third worldish South Africa kind of straddles, I guess, between developing and whatever, but always kind of having to deal with the societal agreed notion of where education sits. And we are education in the arts. So that's two areas that people are historically not funding and not valuing. But I think we also take that on. We take on that identity and then we live with that. And what I'm sort of hearing in between the lines with you is that you're not taking it. You're not going to take it. You know what I mean? And we've got to kind of mentally shift ourselves and put ourselves against all the other biggest innovators of the world and the banking and the corporate spaces or whatever it might be, and demand that for ourselves as education innovators so that we can make the change that is so, so necessary. In South Africa, I have a foreigner nonprofit, and when we ask for support and grant funding so that we can get to underserved communities, do you know how often we are told that our intervention is good and interesting, but what about the literacy and the numeracy? And of course, South Africa, you've even got sanitation and basic issues that have to be dealt with. And I recently wrote an article for the paper to say, of course, that has to be the foundation, right? Of course, sanitation and basic needs, but it cannot be the ceiling. If it is the ceiling, if that's all we're going to shoot for, then we're never going to catch up as a continent, etc. Just to reflect back at you how much you're inspiring us and myself here to say that we need to kind of demand to be taken seriously as education innovators. And anyone, if you're listening to us and in this HundrED community and beyond, let's stand together and kind of get ourselves taken seriously.
Can I just express resonance at what you said? Because in my previous life, or before Holotracker, I was running these programs. I was designing play spaces. I was occupying school halls and building playgrounds and all that kind of stuff. And I had that same problem of people not prioritizing these things. I can design the best programs. It happens like once a year, right? Percent of the time they'll focus on grades. I think that's kind of the mission of what we're trying to do at Holotracker. I like what you said, to get people to take education innovation seriously. It's expensive to do so today. You have to hire a researcher to show how, your programs are leading to success in other dimensions, and it's related to grades. And it's a whole convoluted process that nobody's interested in doing. When you can just say that these moments are observable, that we can pick up these moments and we can support them where they are. And by the way, it will support them in long-term life outcomes. And I think that's kind of the mission of Holotracker, to make that invisible, intangible into something that's not abstract. That's something that you can hold and touch. And I used the word just now, that the system can hold and prioritize. So I really hope that's the case, that in the schools that have implemented this, they start to prioritize these programs rather than just their grades.
And I guess something like HundrED that brought us all together and made us now become friends and community, and this connection is part of what elevates this conversation. And who knows who might be listening, but let's together push forward that agenda for education innovation to be better funded and supported. But Alex, I want to ask you to pose our final question to our guest today.
Yeah, my pleasure. This has been such a wide-ranging conversation, and I know I still have like 10 more things I want to ask you that range from PISA to, how teachers experience students between classrooms, but we only have time for one more. And so we'd like to ask every one of our innovators as they come here what their dream for the future of education is. So what is your dream?
Yeah, I feel like I should have left my comment for this part instead. My dream is that people take education innovation seriously. I think there are so many innovators that are doing great work that are today being pushed down that priority list, that we have an exam, we have to cancel that program. How many schools have done that, right? And when we can finally say that these deep essential skills are what we're developing in our students, and have always been. It's not a first century thing. This has taken a language 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and we've been trying at this problem for a long time. My dream is that we can now seriously take these things as a tangible, observable skill, that we can develop them where they are, and our students will be able to then thrive in a range of different programs, a range of different activities that they can do, and not just sit in the classroom, because that's the most tangible thing that they have, grades. So I think that's my dream, to think about how we can appreciate the human potential much more than we do today.
Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your beautiful mind and your gorgeous work in the world. And thank you everyone for listening. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Do you have an education innovation you want to share with the world? The call for the 2026 Global Collection is now open. Apply at HundrED.org.